Hey everyone, welcome back to BYOD. Today we have a very special guest, the director of BLACKFISH, will join us and we'll look at what it takes to make a film that documents and exposes the treatment of orcas and their trainers inside the very secretive SeaWorld Corporation. Stay tuned. Gabriela Cowperthwaite is the director of the gut-wrenching and breathtaking film BLACKFISH, which premiered at the 2013 Sundance Film Festival. The film also screened at the True False, Miami, San Francisco, Seattle, and Hot Docs film festivals this year. The film is an eye-opening and heartbreaking look into the inhumane treatment of orca whales that SeaWorld has perpetrated to monetize its whale attractions, as well as the trainers whose lives are risked and sometimes lost in caring for these PTSD-stricken animals. Please welcome Gabriela.
Thank you. Hello.
Thank you for coming down.
No, my pleasure.
We were so excited to have you on the show because it's such an important film that you made and fascinating. Of course, it reminds me of The Cove upon seeing it and just the, the expose element, the sea animal element, but it's very different in that, in this case, and they had some dealings with the SeaWorld Corporation, but you really plunged into uncovering what goes on there. Tell me how you even got started with this project.
Yeah, I'm a mother who took her kids to SeaWorld. So I don't come from any animal activism or any sort of background in that world. I became kind of, I guess, fascinated, horrified by the accident, by the idea that a top SeaWorld trainer came to be killed by a killer whale. Dawn Brancheau in 2010. So in my head, I think my pop knowledge of killer whales was that I knew they didn't eat us or kill us in the wild or anything like that. So I was like, well, this must have been an accident. So anyway, I just sort of read about it as much as I could. And then actually didn't take very long for me to realize. I think the first thing I learned was, one of the first things I learned from reading an article by Tim Zimmerman in Outside Magazine called Killer in the Pool, was that Tilikum had killed twice before. So that was shocking to me, and just the idea that we sort of don't know that. I mean, I think some people are like, oh yeah, wasn't there a guy, some homeless man who stayed late, late one night at the park and was killed by Tilikum? Like, we kind of have this strange memory, I think, of something that might have gone wrong before at SeaWorld, but I don't think people knew that it was this same whale.
They downplayed it. I mean, they really kind of...
That's right.
They painted it like that guy had just kind of wrong place, wrong time, was a vagabond.
Right, and these were like drownings or deaths by hypothermia. That's right.
That's right.
That's right. So it really wasn't necessarily the whale or whatnot.
And they must have a massive PR firm and a massive, operation and just keeping everything down, because I guess, like peeling back the layers of an onion, you just went from there and then just somehow got down to even footage of the trainers lying about the nature of how long the lifespan of a whale.
That's right. That's right. And those.
Where'd you get all that footage? Amazing footage.
Yeah. Well, we shot that. You
did?
Yeah. Yeah.
All those different trainers saying that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was. It's hard to admit. It's hard for me to watch because I know for a fact that those trainers are told to say that. And that one thing that I did learn about, working on this documentary, was that the trainers themselves, the folks who sort of work with the animals, are the ones who care about the animals, and who are paid nothing, and who are sort of putting themselves front and center at risk on a daily basis for the animals.
And have no idea the risk that they are actually
no idea of the risk. Right. In a lot of cases, they don't kind of understand, I think, the whole world of risk that they're actually, putting themselves in. And then they are given these facts, right, that they just sort of spew out, like the 25 to 35 years, and, whales live longer in captivity than they do in the wild. And they don't seek any information outside of SeaWorld to just sort of verify that, because in their heads, SeaWorld wrote the book on killer whales. So why would they ever seek to challenge that, right?
And SeaWorld actually covers the information, even hides the history of the whales that have become violent due to the abuse they've undergone from the trainers themselves.
That's right. It's always, and it's kind of this weird negligible world, because it's like they will say, no, we've always disclosed the dangers, and the trainers themselves know this is a high risk job. They themselves, have encountered aggression from many different whales, yet it's the way that it's perpetuated. It's the way that they were told. So like a lot of people were told that if you fall into the water with Tilikum,
right,
the outcome wouldn't be good. But whoever told them that you can be lying on the slide out on the side of the pool,
right,
and Tilikum can come up and grab you, which was what happened to Dawn. So they sort of never knew kind of the full extent.
No, she was the most, the most sort of experienced. She was a lead trainer, right?
That's right. That's right.
She defined the career of a trainer.
Oh yeah, poster child, yeah, everything.
Poster child. Let's take a look at your infiltration, and we'll work back from there. Let's look at SeaWorld versus nature and talk about how Gabriela got this footage.
Because the whales in their pools die young, they like to say that all orcas die at 25 or 30 years.
25 to 35 years.
25 to 35 years.
They're documented in the wild, living to be about 35 and mid-30s. They tend to live a lot longer in this environment because they have all the veterinary care.
And of course, that's false. We knew by 1980, after a half a dozen years of the research, that they live equivalent to human lifespans. And every other potentially embarrassing fact is twisted and turned and denied one way or another.
So in the wild, they live less. And then,
like the floppy dorsal fins.
25% of whales have a fin that turns over like that as they get older.
Dorsal collapse happens in less than 1% of wild killer whales. We know this. All of the captive males, 100%, have collapsed dorsal fins.
And they say that they're a family, that the whales are in their family. They have their pods, but that's just an artificial assemblage of their collection, however management decides they should mix them, and whichever ones happen to be born or bought and brought in. That's not a family, come on.
Amazing. Thank you. And I can't see that dorsal fin anymore. I know. I was just saying to you that I showed this to my son and said to him, so we want to go back to SeaWorld sometime soon afterwards? And he said, no. So I think that you have a very powerful vehicle for educating children about this. And you really did ride a line where it can be seen by, it's not overly violent, and yet it's dealing with some, death.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
That was part of the reason, what we purpose was to not make it this graphic thing that people couldn't stomach and take their children to. I feel like children need to watch it.
But it's also such an amazing title. The title comes from, they were called Blackfish, yeah?
Yeah, so the First Nations people up in kind of Pacific Northwest area and the old-time fishermen actually would refer to them as blackfish, and they kind of coexisted with them, sort of alongside them, and fished next to them, and just knew, whatever, instinctively, even back then, that this was an animal that was never to be captured and never to be harmed. And so I just thought the lore of that was so powerful that it's kind of that's a lore, a legend that echoes back in what happened today.
Now, SeaWorld obviously didn't get that memo about capturing whales, and started quite early on, like what, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, doing this?
Yeah, about 40.
Okay, so you
60s.
had access, and you did some cool graphics too to kind of show us how these whales were captured, and you found a gentleman who's quite a character who actually was involved very much in the capture of the whales. Tell me about finding him and what your process was like there.
So that was pretty incredible. His name is John Crow, and I think he'd been, interviewed before or something like that, and people knew that this was a guy who had some regret back in the day, kind of late 60s, early 70s, about what he had done. But then I found out that he was probably no longer with us. He was, maybe had already died, and nobody really knew where he lived anymore. So I just knew his name, and I knew around maybe what his age range was, and so I just called every John Crow. I think I started with Canada, Western Canada, and went to Seattle, went to Washington.
Wow.
Just good old-fashioned cold calling, and finally found him in Oregon and called, and this man said, "Hello." I said, "Is this John Crow?" And he said, "What's left of him?" And I was like,
"Really?"
There was just something about it. I was just like, I know this is my guy. But he, we drove 14 hours for like a 1-hour interview, and I just needed, for whatever reason, I'd seen that Penn Cove capture footage, and it's kind of this well-documented event, but I never understood what was happening. It just looks like a bunch of whales coming up and being corralled,
right.
But I didn't understand.
Somebody to
that was
decipher it.
I needed somebody to just tell me what was really happening there, and John Crow literally laid hands on whales to try and capture them, and kind of has a hard time, I think, forgiving himself for that.
It's funny, you were probably like, why can't his name be Cowperthwaite? John Cowperthwaite. Why does it have to be Crow?
I know, exactly.
May as well be John Smith.
That's right, or Ezekiel.
But
Crow.
it is amazing though, when we try, when we persevere like that, when we do that, it's like we get gems.
That's
you
right.
know? Isn't
That's
it funny
right.
how hard we have
gosh.
to try?
And
Same thing in the edit. It's those nights when you stay up all night, that the gifts come.
That's it. And you do get beaten down. I mean, you're in this industry as well. Like you're so used to getting the door slammed in the face or getting hung up on, and there are times where you're just like, just another week of rejection, for something that maybe nobody's even going to see. We come from humble pie. It's documentary DNA.
Yeah.
So
it's an irrational pursuit.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That one must do.
Yeah, you're compelled to do it for all these other reasons, not because you'll think you'll be successful at it. So yeah, that was one of those things that I just tell documentary students today. I'm just like, keep persevering. Like every day, just pretend like none of that rejection ever happened.
Oh yeah.
Because all it takes is that one phone call.
No, I mean, I woke up today to 2 emails from Europe because they, are up before we are. Both very disappointing.
Right.
And I thought, as I brushed my teeth, and I thought, okay,
exactly.
That means I have to put that much more effort in today.
That's exactly.
Right.
That's exactly.
I will turn this around.
That's exactly.
Because you just have to. You have to make everything make you even just try that much harder.
That's right. That's right. And John Crow was the one guy who put the historical, I think, world and reference in context for me.
He was
just
great.
as a storyteller. So that was it.
I mean, straight out of hair and makeup after 14 hours. Let's take a look at John Crow and look at capturing orcas.
It was a really exciting thing to do until everybody wanted to do it.
What were they telling you were going to do?
Capture orcas.
They had aircraft, they had spotters, they had speedboats, they had bombs they were throwing in the water. They were lighting their bombs with acetylene torches in their boats and throwing them as fast as they could to herd the whales into coves. But the orcas had been caught before, and they knew what was going on, and they knew their young ones would be taken from them. So the adults without young went east into a cul-de-sac, and the boats followed them, thinking they were all going that way, while the mothers with babies went north. But the capture teams had aircraft, and they have to come up for air eventually, and when they did, the capture teams alerted the boats and said, oh no, they're going north, the ones with babies. So the boats, the speedboats, caught them there and herded them in. And then they had fishing boats with seine nets that they would stretch across so none could leave, and then they could just pick out the young ones.
We ended up just going with my footage.
So he goes on to talk about what he felt as they separated the babies. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so he, I think John Crow, this was just a summer job for him, and he was just kind of a young man, and they needed a really experienced diver, and so he went into a pod of killer whales, and his job was to capture the little ones. So,
for shipping costs.
That's right, because they're lighter, and again, once they land in a place, who doesn't want to see a baby shamu? They're worth a tremendous amount of money. And they can be trained, all the way up, starting from, calf size. So he just remembers putting his hands on whales and moving them. And when he was moving this one calf, he just couldn't believe that the whole family stayed there, and her whole pod stayed there and kept calling at her, and then she would call back to them, and they were having this dialogue, and it was like this grieving moment, and he, this big burly guy who you'd think wouldn't necessarily be affected by it, said it was just visceral. Everybody who was there suddenly knew what they were doing, and everything came into perspective. We were, taking this a baby from its family, and they're screaming at it, and the baby's screaming back, and who knows what they're saying. But the fact that they all stayed there and sort of, essentially could have all been captured, and putting themselves in danger to just not leave that calf. He can't really live with that. I mean, he has a hard time shaking it even to this day. So then, I think this was, cathartic. Anytime he speaks about this, it's sort of cathartic for him, and it's a visceral interview as a result of that. I think.
Yeah, I mean, it just, somebody so gruff, and as you described, lives on the brink of land, on the water, a toughened fisherman, starts crying, shedding tears.
And he was in, his comment about displacing, rulers and dictators in Central American countries, and being part of, military, folks that were part of doing that, and basically him saying, I've done things and seen things that I can't even tell you about, but this is the worst thing I've ever done. To me, was just, of course, as soon as the camera was off, I was like, so what did you do in Central America? Just was like, what's going on?
Okay, we want to hear it on BYOD.
Yeah, exactly. He told me he
internet.
Couldn't tell me. He told me one day I'll tell you, but I can't tell you now.
And you're like, okay, I'll make that 14-hour drive. You call me.
That's
let me know when.
That's right.
I'm sure it was a beautiful drive. I mean, this is majestic. And seeing them out there, you actually went with the trainers and took them out there, right? Some of the SeaWorld trainers at the end of the film.
They actually go out there. I tagged along with them. They go there for a kind of a reunion of sorts every year, every July. So they go and see the southern residents passing through the Puget Sound in the San Juan Islands every July, kind of mid-July or so. So to me, that was such an obvious end of the film, I think.
I want everybody to get educated a little more, since we have access to your beautiful footage, about orcas. And then I just want to talk to you about what you're hoping will happen with this film as you roll it out, because it's making such an impact everywhere. But it seems to me now there's this regulation about trainers not being able to ride the whales anymore. And that protects the trainers, but what about the whales? So let's look at about orcas.
They live in these big families, and they have lifespans very similar to human lifespans. The females can live to about 100, maybe more, males to about 50 or 60, but the adult offspring never leave their mother's side. Each community has a completely different set of behaviors. Each has a complete repertoire of vocalizations with no overlap. You could call them languages. The scientific community is reluctant to say any other animal but humans uses languages, but there's every indication that they use languages.
So we learn in this film that that orcas talk to each other, that they have these really strong family units, that they need a much wider expanse, and we understand that this whale that is a killer, has turned into literally a killer whale, was taken as a baby and treated and treated horribly, abused, starved out by a trainer, right? In order to do certain actions.
Well, he was mostly, I mean, the abuse, no trainers ever would actively abuse a whale, but food is leverage. Yeah, they would try to.
He was the one though, wasn't it Tillamook who had the situation where if he didn't do, or if the other whale didn't, then he would be attacked by the other whale because he didn't act.
That's right.
What was it?
That's right. So it was essentially, he was at a place called Sea Land of the Pacific before SeaWorld, and he was kind of the newcomer. And, you know, it's a matriarchal society, so a lot of times the females, they're the top of the food chain there. And so for whatever reason, he wasn't picking up on the tricks and some of the behaviors. And when he wouldn't do that, then all 3 of the whales would get punished and not get the big fat salmon or whatever, the food. And so those 2 whales would get mad at Tilikum because he wasn't doing it right, and would rake him, which is, you know, taking their teeth and running it down their bodies.
Right.
And so he'd have these bloody rake marks, and was essentially bullied by these 2 females, Haida and Nuka. And then at night, they'd be put into a module because
Tiny
little module.
little
They
cell,
couldn't turn
prison
around.
cell.
That's exactly right. With, you know, for Tilikum, he's side by side with 2 whales that are attacking him for 2/3 of his life.
So this really is post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's, how else can we, you know, what else can we say about that? It's, I mean, this is the first, you know, this is the first event was him being captured in Iceland and presumably taken away from his family or his pod, because we know they swim with their mothers for their entire lives, male orcas do.
And if they have language, it's probably geographically specific. So he's got a language going in Iceland, like Icelandic
That's
people
right.
might have, and then he's put into SeaWorld with whales from everywhere, and now they're called a family, and they're not a family.
That's exactly right. These are whales that are all thrown in together in terms of, you know, SeaWorld or whatnot. Don't speak the same languages or dialects, you know, don't have anything in common, have a different way of working out their issues or aggressions or whatnot, or their place on the social hierarchy. And so then there's conflict constantly. They're constantly social strife and fighting. And in the wild, this doesn't happen. I mean, they vie for hierarchy, but then this subdominant animal leaves, right? And says, touche, I'm done, okay, sorry. But in captivity, nobody leaves. So you're just constantly fighting, you know, and confronting conflict in this situation.
Right. And so what is being done about that? So OSHA comes in and they pass this law that stops trainers from, you know, handling the animals, right? Essentially.
And in the water. They can't swim with them, right.
What's being done for the actual whales? Is there a movement of any kind, or are you starting one, or what's happening? There must be something.
You know, there are a ton of movements, I think, out there. You know, none of which has been entirely successful at stopping killer whales, you know, from being in captivity. It's a $2 billion a year industry. Not a lot of people know that, but it's, I mean, $2 billion a year. And it's just kind of mind-boggling. That's right. And essentially, I think our trainer, Jeff Ventry, talks about the Shamu Stadium. That's like the Nike swoosh of SeaWorld. So basically, it's about 60 to 70% of their money comes from Shamu, comes from killer whales. So these are multi-million-dollar animals. So the idea of not having them in captivity is just not even something that SeaWorld would be willing to take
trapping them, new ones, as we speak?
They can't, in North America, you can't. So after this Penn Cove, these captures, people started saying, oh my gosh, these are families, and these are incredibly intelligent animals, we can't be doing this.
But now they can go to Iceland and do it.
They can have other people, you know, do things, and those animals then end up in parks where SeaWorld can own the whales, even though SeaWorld technically doesn't own the park. They can own the whales at a certain park.
Yeah, they rent them out.
What's that?
It's like they rent them out, the whale that
they call it breeding loans. That's right.
The whale that killed that man. What was the whale's name?
Yeah. Keto. Keto, who killed Alexis.
Yeah.
Something. Yeah. Keto is a SeaWorld-owned whale. So, you know,
shipped out to
Alexis,
the Canary Islands.
Correct. And Alexis was a Spanish guy living
Star
there.
trainer.
Star trainer there at Laurel Parque, killed, but he was someone who was trained by SeaWorld. So, I mean, their hands were all over that
Wow.
issue. But
I wonder how many of the trainers are seeing this film. Are you having special trainer screenings?
trainers at SeaWorld?
Yeah.
You know, I think, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's sort of like, it's a strange thing that happens, I think, with trainers who are at SeaWorld. And we have people attesting to it, you know, throughout the film. But there's just all these things that happen. So they're there, they get there, and you become a trainer there because you love the whales. You want to swim with them. Kind of like we all do. It's like an instinct, you know, I want to swim with dolphins. It's on everybody's bucket list or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why they do it. They get there and they start seeing that this is not what they thought it was. This is a pretty terrible place to have their animals. So in a way, they get in there because they love the animals, and they end up leaving because they love the animals. That said, the ones that don't leave oftentimes don't leave because they're never sure if they leave if anyone will take care of their whale as well as they did.
Right.
So
they're in captivity,
that's
essentially.
to me,
Trainers are
they're
trapped.
complete victims of the same system.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like any totally unjust system.
That's
where
right.
the prison guards are part of the prison.
That's
they're
exactly
imprisoned
it. That's right.
in the prison.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then
What about that trainer that the whale drags down again and again? And I was saying to David before the show, I was saying, amazing that they didn't shoot the whale at some point to stop the trainer from being brought down to the bottom of the pool again and again. And we both looked at each other and said, that's a multi-million-dollar whale.
Yeah,
that trainer was going to have to go.
That's right. That's right.
Now, how do you have this footage? I'm going to show another clip. It's Tamari, this trainer, gets attacked.
Okay.
How do you have this footage?
So when OSHA took SeaWorld to court and said trainers are unsafe, a lot of the footage was submitted as evidence or exhibits. So I FOIA'd, I Freedom of Information Acted, for some of this footage.
You FOIA'd?
FOIA'd for it, exactly. So it would be a year, and you might get some, and you might not. But again, it's another testament to pounding the pavement with documentary filmmaking, because I just kept pursuing them. I flew to Atlanta, on my own dime, and just sort of sat there at their office and said, anything for me? I'm here, and just hopefully just putting a face to all the emails. Yeah, that's right. And I'll go back to LA now. Because it was just so valuable to the film. So, yeah, Freedom of Information Act was hugely helpful in getting footage for the film.
Let's look at this clip of Tamari.
Tamari made mistakes. The most important one was interacting with whales without a spotter. So she's putting her foot on Orchid, she's taking her foot off. She's putting her foot on Orchid, her rostrum, she's taking it off. Watching the video, knowing Orchid, your stomach drops because you know what's probably gonna happen. She grabbed her foot. Tamari whips around and she grabs the gate. You see her just ripped from the gate. At this point, Tamari knows that she's in trouble. She's under the water. Splash and Orchid both have her. She's totally out of view. No other trainer knows that this is happening. People start to scream, as the park guest that was filming it. You don't see her, but you hear Tamari surface. You hear her just scream out, "Somebody help me." And the way she screamed it was just such a blood-curdling, like, she knew she was gonna die. Robin, when he ran over, he made a brilliant decision. He told a trainer to run it and take the chain off Kasaka's gate. By taking that chain off, it would give the precursor to Orchid that Kasaka was coming in. Kasaka is more dominant than Orchid. So Orchid let her go. Her arm, it was U-shaped. It was compound fractured. She's very lucky to be alive, that's for sure.
80 now.
We are just discussing where you can see this film. And it turns out you can see it, if you're in New York, you can see it at Lincoln Center right now. And I believe in a couple other theaters, you should look it up. And in LA, it's playing at the Laemmle. And then it's expanding to, 80 cities across America?
I think it's in 80 markets right now. And it's expanding more, I think, this weekend. And then we have an international expansion, too, that's happening, kind of concurrent to this. And then we have a run with, Magnolia is doing the theatrical here in the States. Dogwoof is doing the UK, which has been a great run.
Yeah, Dogwoof.
But then CNN Films picks up the broadcast in October.
Ooh.
So it'll have a broadcast life with CNN.
That's going to be really important.
Pretty huge,
in terms of
right?
the film making an impact. Yeah.
Yeah, not everybody goes and buys a ticket to see a documentary in a theater. So
Although you should in the case of this film, because it's very suspenseful,
Right.
I believe is a really important element to a theatrical film,
Right.
is that waiting on the edge of your seat element, which you build into this film. Tell me about the editing. You probably went through, there's a bunch of different ways you could have told this story.
Right.
So how did you, what was the guiding?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We knew that, it's funny, there's so much information about whales in captivity and whales and in nature, and I just knew that the strongest way to tell the story was to tell Tilikum's story, essentially, and to just have a really sort of tight narrative that sticks to that, and to not shoehorn in all this information that might make you hate SeaWorld, or might make you just,
Well, you succeed in that.
Right. I mean, I guess I didn't want it to be this hatchet job against them, because if you can just tell the story and kind of pull back the curtain and just let the facts and just sort of show rather than tell, then, I think then people come away with it with, maybe if they feel something, it's because they were sort of told the truth, and then they kind of own that feeling, right? Because I didn't sit there and tell them what to feel. They discovered it for themselves. So you sort of arm them with the truth by just telling them this single narrative, this story. So that was probably the hardest thing out of everything, is keeping discipline, because there are so many things.
Not making it some macro.
Oh my gosh!
Sort of survey says.
Sure.
Sort of thing. But you did.
And like we didn't
you
talk
did
about
tell
sea
such
lion
a
and
touching story about the little girl who separated from her mom, the little orca girl.
Yeah.
Once in a while you would go off and
That's
talk
right.
about another whale or two.
That's right. So it had to be through the trainer's eyes. So it had to be their perspective.
Okay,
So
okay.
the only way for me to learn about Tilikum was to talk about the people who work with him.
All right.
So we started with Sealand with those folks. And then the other trainers at SeaWorld, I kind of wanted the arc of the story to follow essentially Tilikum's story, but through the eyes of trainers who started out loving SeaWorld and I wanted us to kind of go through the disillusionment with them.
Right.
And so they each gave me their moment of disillusion, and for two of them it was calf-mother separations. So, that was incredibly powerful to me as well. But that was really, for both of them, for Carol Ray and John Hargrove, this was the moment they knew the jig was up.
You definitely feel when you're watching the interviews with the trainers that the trainers, it's like a real catharsis. It's something they've wanted somebody to talk to them about since they worked at SeaWorld. That is just, they're horrified.
That's right.
And they hate SeaWorld.
That's right. I mean, it's funny, they're really, people say, oh, was it really hard to get them to talk? And in some cases, a couple people backed out last minute because they were afraid that SeaWorld would come after them.
I'm surprised SeaWorld hasn't come after you. I mean, I think it's quite something. And your theory on that is what?
I don't know, really. I think that, I do know that they wouldn't be able to come after the facts of the film or how the film was told. I mean, all of they're just indisputable facts. I mean, anybody can look them up online.
But they could pick, usually you have to get a release form from the people speaking, or a location release, like when you're shooting the trainers at the...
Yeah.
But you kind of, there is that freedom of speech and that kind of expose element of
That's right.
kind of...
That's right.
I mean, you had to get E&O insurance, so you probably... I mean, this is a very inside baseball conversation, but we are like the doc show.
That's right.
To other filmmakers out there, I mean, if they feel like they want to expose a corporation, should they just go in and get whatever footage they can?
I think you just have to be really careful. You have to tell it. Fair use is such that you will invoke it eventually, because you need footage that people might not be willing to give to you.
Right.
So you have to really have that discussion with yourself. Is this completely important? Can this segment be told in any other way? And am I using it really in an educational way? Am I using just as much as I need to, or am I using too much? Like, you really have to have that dialogue, because for me, all it takes is someone having an issue, SeaWorld having an issue with one thing, and then they start trying to debunk the whole thing, So I needed it to be airtight. Yeah. So we crossed our T's and dotted our I's, and there's so much information that I could have shoved in there, but I didn't, because I wasn't 100% confident that the footage would be used judiciously, and that this was, I was only going to use what I needed to tell the story. So, I didn't even go into sea lion and otter, for example. That whole, there's like a whole tentacle of SeaWorld that I don't even want to.
Is that going to be like this part 2 from you? Is that the next film? Oh my gosh.
It's just like you can't even.
Oh really?
I mean,
I love otters.
Oh yeah.
Is it tragic?
Yeah.
It's all tragic.
You'll see. I mean, it's.
I will see.
Tragic. No, well, I mean, I think trainers and people are wanting to talk about it.
Okay.
You know, are really wanting to be vocal about that
I
side
want
of it.
you to make that film. I'm sure that you are like, life is too short. I'm done with SeaWorld.
Right. Well, there's so many truths for all these filmmakers that wanted to do a film about whales or want to do like. I can just freaking lob up that ball for you, and you just can knock it because there's so much stuff I didn't touch upon. But mostly to make it an integral film that wasn't trying to do everything.
Yes.
That was just trying
really
to do one
tells a
thing
story.
decently. You know.
Tell the story.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, you did a fantastic job, and congratulations on the huge release this film is having. And it's a major feat in 2013 to have, you know, your film spread by, you know, various big distribution companies. I mean, that's very rare these days. And so I hope that that muscle gets you everything, you know, that you desire, but also that this film gets in front of a lot of people, especially with the CNN release. I'm really excited about that because it would be nice to put a dent in SeaWorld's revenue and maybe have them change the way they treat whales as a result. Or somebody to watch this and maybe start a movement, because it'd be great if people just protested. And really made a stink about this, you know? Maybe I'll do that. I think I'm gonna go over there now. I'm gonna go over to SeaWorld right now, guys. This has been an awesome episode. Thank you so much for coming down. It's great to meet you, another powerful woman making documentaries.
Thank you.
And a mom.
Well, I'm in good company.
And I'm gonna leave everyone with the trailer for Blackfish so that you get yourself over to a theater. Go to the theater. Support documentaries in the theater. We'll see you next week. Thank you.
When you look into their eyes, you know somebody is home.
They're an animal that possesses great spiritual power, not to be meddled with.
Orange County Sheriff's Office.
We need SO to respond for a dead person at SeaWorld. A whale has eaten one of the trainers.
Tilikum is the one that went after her.
Dawn is the senior trainer here at Shamu Stadium.
She captured what it means to be a SeaWorld trainer, that it made me realize what happened to her really could have happened to anyone.
I've been expecting somebody to be killed by a Tilikum.
We weren't told much about it, other than it was trainer error.
It didn't just happen. It's not a singular event. You have to go back to understand this.
The speedboat herded them in, and they could just pick out the young ones.
This is the worst thing that I've ever done.
When Tilikum arrived at SeaWorld,
He was twice as large as the next animal.
We stored these whales in what we call a module, which was 20 feet across and 30 feet deep, and the lights were all turned out.
Probably led to what I think is a psychosis.
All whales in captivity are all psychologically traumatized. It's not just Tilikum.
If you were in a bathtub for 25 years, don't you think you'd get a little psychotic?
Dawn would tell you that it was her mistake.
They blamed her.
It's just a bold-faced lie.
I was just instructed to get rid of the tape.
the industry has a vested interest in spinning these. That sells a lot of Shamu dolls. It sells a lot of tickets at the gate.
There's no record of an orca doing any harm in the wild.